In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this falling autumn leaves animation. So you can use this tutorial to put falling leaves into your 3D scenes, or you can do what I'll be doing at the end of this video, which is rendering these out as transparent images and then using them as an overlay over a video. And if you'd like to purchase the project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page with the links in the description. And when you purchase the project files, you'll get the finished overlay if you want to add it to a video, and you'll get the finished Blender file if you just want to throw the animated leaves into your project. And after this video, if you want to watch some more fall themed tutorials, definitely check out my fall autumn theme tutorial playlist where you can learn how to create some more fall themed artworks like an apple pie, a pumpkin, and some more fall tutorials. And then one more thing before we start, I want to let you know about a really great render farm for Blender. BlenderGrid is an easy to use render farm specifically designed for Blender. I've used the service and I highly recommend it. Upload your Blender file or a zip file with the blend file and textures. You can change the render settings on the website before rendering. BlenderGrid will let you know the cost before you start the render. You can even choose when you want the render to finish if you're on a tight deadline. While it renders, you can check the rendered frames to make sure everything is rendering properly. Once it finishes, just download the files and compile the frames in a video editor. Use the link in the description to get $20 of render credit on your first render. Now before we start, I will be using a few different resources online. So here on Ambient CG, I'm going to be downloading this Leaf Set 027. Link will be in the description if you want to download it, and I'm going to download the 2K JPEG version. And then also to help us get some more realistic lighting, I'll be using this Autumn Forest 01 on polyhaven.com, and here you can just choose 1K for the resolution because all we need is the lighting data, and then I can just change this over to HDR and then you can just download this. Now I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine for this tutorial because I am trying to make this look realistic, but it'll also work great in Blender Eevee, so you can really use whichever one you want, but I'll be using Cycles. So now what I want to do is load in the image, so I'll just first start by selecting everything and we'll delete everything, and I'll go to the add menu and I'll go down here to image and then I'll choose a mesh plane. Then I'm just going to locate to the folder where I downloaded the images. So once you download the images from Ambient CG, you'll just need to extract the zip file and go into the folder. And I'm just going to select the color map and then just leave the shader here set to principled and click on import images as planes. Now if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse into the material preview, I can press the period on the numpad to zoom into the image, and you can see there's all the leaves, but I want to add the transparency map and the other maps to make them look more realistic. So let's click here to go to the shading workspace, and again go into the material preview to preview the image. And then what I can actually do is just select this image and hit X to delete it. And if I select the principled shader, I'm going to be using the principled texture setup to automatically set up all the textures. So you need to make sure you have the node wrangler enabled. So you can click on edit, you can go to the preferences, and then over here on the add-ons tab, you can search for node and just enable the node wrangler add-on. So now select the principled shader and you can press Ctrl-Shift-T. That's going to bring up Blender's file browser, and you can now locate to the same folder. And I'm going to select the color and then hold down the control key and select the roughness, the normal GL, and the opacity. Click on principled texture setup. We don't need the other maps, so just those four. And you can see it's automatically going to set up all the texture maps. So the color, the roughness, the alpha, which is going to tell it where it's going to be transparent, and then the normal. So now that's going to look a lot more realistic. And of course we have the alpha transparency, which is exactly what we want. And also right down here on the normal map, I'm going to turn this strength up to 2 just so they look a bit more bumpy, because I think that looks a bit nicer to make them look more bumpy. So I'll now go back over here to the layout, and I want to go to top view by hitting 7 on the numpad, and I'll hit tab to go into edit mode. I'll just deselect everything, and then I'm going to use the knife tool. So zoom into one of the leaves and you can hit the K button for the knife tool. Then what you can do is you can click along here. You can also just zoom in and then hold down the shift key and middle click to move around while you're using the knife tool. So what I'm going to do is click along here, and I'm going to just cut out the leaves. And I don't need to cut them out super precise because they have an alpha transparency, so just the edges will be transparent. So I'll just go along here and just cut out the leaves. We can just go like this. It's fine if it's super blocky because all of this area will be transparent. And I'll go all the way down here, here, and then click there and then hit enter. And you can see that's going to cut out the leaf. And you can see if this is kind of like going through another leaf, that's fine. We can fill this later. So we're going to just continue to do that, and I'm going to cut out all the leaves. Now this one here, I don't really want the super green leaf because I want to use the more fall colored leaves, so the leaves which are drying out, but I'm going to go through here and cut out all the leaves. So again, I'll zoom into another one. I'll hit the K button for the knife tool, and for some of them, you don't need to add the stem here, so I can just click here to cut out the stem, and then just go along here, go up here, click there, and then hit enter. You can see now it cut out another one. Now for something like this, you can see that there was a line here that cut through this one. So what I can do is hit the K for the knife tool, and I can click down here, click over here, and then just like choose this one and hit enter. So now you can see that we've kind of cut out this spot, and I also want to hit the K button for the knife tool and maybe just click here, and then click there at the end, and then hit the enter key. So now what you can do is just go to the face select. You can hold down the shift key and select all the faces there, and then just press the F key to fill it. Then you can again hit the K button for the knife tool, and you can just go along here and just cut out the leaves. So I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of the leaves. And another thing you can do if you're having the same issue where there's kind of a line here or a cut here, is you can just cut out the whole leaf and then select both of the faces and hit the F key to fill it. That's another way to fix that issue. So I've cut out all the leaves, so I'm now just going to hold down the shift key and select all the faces there that are connecting to the leaves. So just select all the leaf faces. Then I'm going to press Control I. Control I will invert the selection, and I'll hit the X key, and we're going to delete the faces. Now what I'll do is select everything with the A key, and I want to separate these into their own object. So I'll hit the P key, and we can separate by loose parts. Now if you hit tab to go back to object mode, you can see they're all their own object now. However, the origin point is all in the center, so if we just select all these again, in object mode we can click on object, set origin, and we want to choose origin to geometry, and now you can see the origin point is in the very center of the leaves. So now I'm just going to kind of move some of these leaves down here by box selecting them and kind of moving them over so they're all lined up, and I can just bring them closer together. So now what I want to do is make the leaves more three-dimensional because they're super flat right now and they're not going to look that realistic. And when they are falling, if they're just like these kind of flat pieces of paper, I want to make them look a bit more three-dimensional. So I'll go over to the first one here, and I can go into edit mode, and I'll hit the K button for the knife tool, and I can just like click here and then hit enter, hit the K button again, maybe add another cut here, hit the K button again, add another cut there, and then another one like right there. So I'm going to cut out like 4 different cuts here. And now I can hit the O key to turn on the proportional editing, and I can just like select this face here, and I can bring it up on the Z axis, and I need to scroll my mouse wheel to make the proportional editing smaller, kind of like that. I can also go to the edge select and then select some of the edges and kind of pull these edges around just to make them more three-dimensional. And also, if we box select all of the leaves, let's use the object context menu and shade it smooth so that those edges look more smooth. So I'm just going to continue to do that for all the leaves. So hit the K button for the knife tool in edit mode. We're just going to kind of add some loops there to the leaves. So cut that out there, K button again, cut that out there, and then maybe another one there. And then you can go to either the face select or like the edge select, and you can maybe rotate the leaf, maybe move it up. Maybe select this part here and kind of bring it down a bit, whatever you want to do. You could also hit the K button for the knife tool and add a cut there. And then you kind of move the stem down a little bit or rotate it. I just want to make it more three-dimensional so they look more realistic. All right, so something like that one. So you can see now that one's a bit three-dimensional. So I'm just going to continue to do that for all of the other leaves. So you can see what I've done now. I've just made all the leaves a bit more 3D, and that'll make them look a lot more realistic. So I now want to move these all into their own collection. So I'll click and drag to box select all the leaves. I'll hit the M key, we'll click on new collection, and I can just call this leaves and click on create. So if you go over here to the outliner, you can see we have the leaves collection, and we'll be using this for the particle system to make the leaves fall down. So if I just click on the check mark here, that'll disable the leaves. So now you can't see them from the view. So now before we start doing the particle settings, I do want to do a bit of the scene setup. So let's go right over here to the world properties, and I'll be adding in the HDRI. So I'll click on the yellow dot here next to color, and I'll choose environment texture, and then I'll click on open to open up the HDRI. And here's the HDRI that I'll be using from polyhaven.com, and the link will be in the description if you want to download it. So I'll just click on open image. So if I hold down the Z button and go into the rendered viewport mode, you can see this will give us some nice fall autumn lighting. Now also if we go over here to the render properties, I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to take the view transform here and I'll just leave it at the default of AGX, but I'll take the look here and turn it to high contrast, and that'll make the colors look nicer. And then also we can open up the film tab and I'm going to checkmark the transparent button because I want to render this out as transparent images and add it as an overlay so that you can put the fall leaves raining down over a video just like this. But that is totally optional. If you want to add something to the background or just add this into a 3D scene, you could totally do that. And then I also want to add some lighting, so I'll go to the add menu and let's go down here to light and we'll add a sunlight. Now we did already add the HDRI lighting, but I want to add a sunlight just to give some even brighter lighting. So I'll just like rotate the sunlight up like this. And if we go here to the light settings, click here to go to the object data properties, I'm going to make the strength just slightly yellow. So it kind of has that fall look, kind of that orangey yellow light. And then I'll turn the strength up to like a 5. And then also I will go to the add menu. Let's just go here to camera and just add a camera. And I'm going to move my view to about here. And then I'll press Control Alt Numpad 0. And that's going to bring the camera to where we are. I can also just hit G to grab and just move the camera around. And I'll just kind of stick it right there and maybe also rotate it so it's just pointed directly into the scene. Now this is totally optional again, but because I'm going to be adding this as a video overlay, I'm going to change the frame rate to 60 frames per second so it's the same frame rate as my video. So I'm going to click right over here to go to the output properties, and I'm going to be using 2K, which is 2560 by 1440. That's the resolution that I use for screen recording my videos. And then also here on the frame rate, I'm going to change this to 60 frames per second, but that's totally optional and it will really depend on your scene. If you're just doing a 3D animation, you could just leave it at 24 frames per second. So let's now add the particles. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go to mesh and I'll add a plane, and I can bring the plane up on the Z axis and maybe move it over a bit, and I'll hit tab to go into edit mode, and I can scale the plane up a bit, and then I also want to scale the plane on the Y axis or the X axis, scale it up on the X axis so it's a bit longer, something like that. So it's kind of over here to the side because I'm going to add like a bit of wind so that the leaves are kind of falling down there in this direction. But you can of course set up the scene however you want. One thing that you can do, like if you have a tree and you want to have like the leaves look like they're falling out of the tree, then what you could do is scale the plane down and stick the plane inside the tree, and then you can kind of make the leaves look like they're falling out of the tree. But I'm just going to have them right there. So with the plane still selected, we're going to click right here to go to the particle settings. We'll click on the plus to add new particles, and we're going to leave the settings type to emitter. We're not going to use hair, we'll leave it at emitter. Now if I scroll down here, we want to go to the render, so we're going to open up this render and we're going to change the render as to collection. And this way it'll render out a collection of objects, and then we can choose the instance collection and we're going to choose the leaves. So you can hit the spacebar to play the animation and you can see the leaves are just falling. And then one thing that I want to do, because I do video editing in Blender, if I go down here to the playback setting, which is right behind me, the playback setting right here, I'm going to change the sync to audio to play every frame. I have it set to sync to audio because I do video editing, but for doing 3D animations and simulations and stuff, it's better to set it to play every frame so you can see every frame. So I can hit the spacebar and play that, and there's the leaves falling, but the leaves are way too small. So on the render right here under collection, I can turn up the scale and I can see those leaves much better. And I'm going to go into the material preview just so I can see those leaves. And there we go, we now have the leaves falling. So for my scene, I'm going to turn the scale value to 3, and then if I play this, the leaves are a little bit big, so I think what I'll do is just select the plane here in edit mode and kind of scale the plane up a bit like that. And then also I might want to go into the camera view, just select the camera and move the camera back a little bit and maybe move it down here so it fits the scale better to my scene, but you can of course change the scale to whatever works best for your scene size. And then also this scale randomness here, if I turn this up, you can see there's going to be a bunch more randomly sized leaves, but I don't want to turn up to 1 because that doesn't look very realistic. I'm going to turn it down to a smaller number of like 0.4, and that way there is just a small variation in the size of the leaves. Now that is way too many leaves for my scene, so I want much less leaves. So here on the emission number here on the top, I can change this number to just like a 200, and now there's going to be much less leaves. Now if I go into the rendered viewport mode, I don't want to be able to see the plane here because that's going to interact with the lighting, it's going to add shadows and things, and I really don't want it. So what I'm going to do is go back here to the render, and on the render settings I can turn off the show emitter, and that way it's going to hide it. Now, even though the show emitter is turned off, you can still see the plane, but if I give this a quick render, you can see the plane is going to be transparent when it renders out the final image. Now, another thing that I want to do is remove shadows to make it look a bit better. So what I'm going to do is select the plane here, and let's click here to go to the object settings, and I'm going to go here to the visibility, and I'll scroll down here, and on the ray visibility, I can turn off shadow, because I found that sometimes there can be like a bit of a shadow on the leaves, and it doesn't look that nice because the leaves are falling and then they kind of come out of a shadow. So I don't really want a shadow on the leaves, so I'm going to turn off that shadow. Now, there is a big problem, of course, with these leaves, and that is that they're not rotating. So let's select the plane again and go back here to the particles, and you can see there is a rotation, so we'll just check mark that to turn on the rotation. And on this randomize here, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 1, and then also this random phase, I'm also going to turn all the way up to 1. Now, the leaves are moving really fast, and I want to make them moving slower so you can kind of see the leaves better. So let's just scroll down here, and we're going to go way down here to the force field settings, and on this gravity here, we can just turn this way down. So turn down the gravity, and we'll fix the leaves, we'll fix how fast they're moving later, but just for now, I just want to turn the gravity way down. Now, if you look at these leaves, you can see they do appear like they're randomly rotated, but they're not actually rotating while they're falling. So the randomize and the random phase kind of made them be random, but I want to check mark the dynamic here. And then the other thing that we need to do, as well as turning on the dynamic, is we need to open up the angular velocity, and then this amount here, we can turn this amount up. Now this angular velocity amount, I'm going to turn this to a very small number of like a 0.3, and that way they are going to be spinning, but it's just going to be very subtle, because if you turn this up, of course, they're going to be spinning around way too much, and that doesn't look realistic. So this way they're just going to be spinning by a very small amount. So let's now go back to the gravity, and we can change the gravity settings. So if you scroll down here to the field weights, I want to turn the gravity to 0.1, and that way they'll be moving slower. If the gravity is turned up really high, you can see they're falling really fast, but I'll just turn this to like a 0.1. Now the problem with this is that the leaves are kind of moving up and then they start to fall down, and that is because they are coming out of the top of the plane. So an easy way to fix this is to just rotate the plane on the x-axis, and you can rotate it by 180, so type in 180 and then hit enter. So now it's rotated the opposite way around, so the leaves are falling down instead of coming up first. Now you can see the leaves are ending really fast, they're not really falling down to the very end of the scene, and we will fix that later, but I first want to add some wind to affect the leaves a little bit more. So I'll go to the add menu, and we can go down here to force field, and then we can add this wind here. And I can move this wind over and then also rotate it, and you can see now that wind is affecting the leaves, and that looks really cool. Now if you select the wind here and then click here to go to the settings, you can turn up the strength if you want to make it stronger. So if you want to make it look like it's a really breezy day and kind of have the leaves kind of flowing around your scene, you could do that. And another thing you might find useful if you're adding this to a 3D scene is you might want the leaves to bounce off of objects. So for example, if I just add like a plane, scale this up so we have like a ground plane here. Let's say you want the leaves to bounce off of the object. Well, what you can do is just select the plane and go over here to the physics properties, and you can turn on collision. And this way now if I play this, you can see the leaves are going to bounce right off. And then if you don't want them to like bounce away like they are here, you could turn up the friction, turn that friction up to 1, and you could also turn this stickiness value up to 1. And so now they're going to fall, and they're still going to move around because that wind is really strong, but they're not going to move around quite as much, and they're not going to bounce off. So if you're adding it to a 3D scene, that's how you can make the leaves bounce off of objects. But I'll just delete this object. All right, I'm going to select the wind object again, and I can kind of rotate this so it's slightly going up. But then I want to turn the strength much lower down, so it's only pushing the leaves over by a very small amount. So I'll turn this strength value to just like a 0.3, so it's very subtle. So now if I go into the camera view, we need to make the leaves so they're falling farther, but they are just slightly kind of rotating over this way. Maybe I'll even rotate the wind over. So they're just going to slowly move from left to right in the scene. Now we want the leaves to be in the scene for a longer period of time. So let's go back over here to the settings here, and we can take this lifetime and turn this way up. So I'm going to turn this up to a really big number of like 1,000. So the lifetime will be 1,000 frames. So now it will end for 1,000 frames. So now you can see the leaves are just falling way down throughout the scene. Now, if I take this end frame here on the timeline, I'm going to make the end frame 500. That's what I'm going to do for my scene. And later in the video, I'll show you how you can loop the animation if you want to make it loop, but really just change that end frame to however long you want it. I'm going to do a 500 frame animation, and then I will be showing you how to make it a seamless looping animation. Now, another problem with this is that the leaves have to start and then they need to go down into the scene, but because I want to make this a looping animation, I already want there to be lots of leaves in the scene. So right here we have a start frame and an end frame. If I turn the end frame to 1, you can see all the leaves are going to come out as once, so there's a big clump of leaves. However, if I turn the end frame way up to a really large number, now all the leaves are slowly going to come out and it's going to be evenly placed throughout all of the frames. So you can see now there's kind of less leaves, but they're coming out for a longer period of time. Well, what I can do is I can take the start frame and I can turn it to a negative value, and that way when we get to the start frame of frame 1, the leaves were already going to be falling in the scene. So I'm going to turn the start frame to negative 500. So that way the leaves are going to start way over here in the timeline. So you can see now if I go back to frame 1, you can see the leaves are already falling down into the scene. And then for example, I could turn the end frame to just like 500. So it starts at negative 500 and then just ends at 500. And if for some reason you're getting some really weird things, like some of these leaves are moving over like that, that's kind of weird. What you can do is open up the cache here and you can choose to bake this. So we are going to be baking it later. So we can use the bake before we actually do the final render, because you can see some of these leaves are kind of stuck here and there's a bit of issues with the animation right now. So let's go into the rendered viewport mode just to kind of see how this is looking. I'm going to press Control B in the camera and just box select the camera so we have a camera boundary. And you can see again the animation is looking a bit weird, but we'll be baking this later. But you can see that's pretty much it for the animation. But I want to turn this into a looping animation so I can add it as a video overlay and I can just loop it again and again. So if we want to make this a looping animation, what we need to do is copy the particle settings, and we need to add some particles at the starting and then other ones at the end, and that way when it gets to the end it'll be at the same place at the very starting, and so it will be looping. So make sure you change all these settings how you want, because then when we duplicate it, the duplicated ones are going to use the same settings. So what I'm going to do is click on the plus here to add a new particle system. You can see we now have another one, but then if I click here on the drop down, I'm going to use the old particle settings right here. So here's the particle settings, and I can actually just rename this to 1, so particle settings 1. So now if I click back here, you can see both this particle system and this particle system, they have the same settings. But if I click on the second one, I can click on this icon here, which is 2 pieces of paper, and that is going to duplicate the particles. So now this one, I'm going to rename it just to keep it organized, so I'll rename it to 2. So you can see we now have particle settings 1 and particle settings 2. This one here has the first one, and this one here has the second one. So now what I can do is just change the timing to make it a seamless looping animation. So let's click back up here to go to the first one. And for this one, I'm going to have the start frame at minus 500. So it starts way over here on the timeline, and then it's going to end at 0. So make the end frame 0. So it'll end right here. Then we want to click here on the second one, and the second one is going to start at 0, so it'll start right here, but then it will end at 500. So then if you click on the first particles, we can go down here and we can bake it. So just click on the bake button and it's going to go through and bake it. And then if we click on the second one here, we can scroll down and then click on the bake button and it'll bake the second one. Let's press Control S to save this. So now that it's baked them, you can see we're not having any of those weird issues. They all look correct. And if I go over here to the very end, scrub through the timeline, you can see when I get to the very end of the animation, it loops over. And so you can see it's a completely seamless looping animation. And then right here, you can see at the end frame is 500. That's very important. If the end frame wasn't 500, you can see it wouldn't be looping. But because I set the start frame to 500, I also want the frame on the timeline to start at 1 and end at 500. So now I want to do the output settings, and we'll render this to a folder to render out all the images. So I'm going to click right up here to go to the output properties, and right here on the output, I'll click on this file icon to set an output. And here in my folder with my project files, I will click on the plus here to add a new folder. I can call this pics. I will go inside the folder and then I will click on the accept button. And then what's really important is you need to make sure the file format is set to PNG, and then we need to set the color here to RGBA. RGBA stands for red, green, blue, and alpha. If we just used RGB, then it wouldn't render out the transparency, and so when it saved the image, it would just be black. But we need to set it to RGBA so it stores the alpha transparency in the PNG images. So then let's also go up here to the render properties, and if I open up the sampling here, I'm going to set the render samples just to like a 50 because we don't need that many, and I'll also turn on the denoise here so it denoises the image. Now also, if I go into the rendered viewport mode, another thing you could do if you want to is you could select the camera here and go to the camera settings, and you could add a depth of field, and you could turn up the focus distance, and then you could also turn down the f-stop here, and so you could set a distance for where the depth of field is going to focus on. So this would be really cool if you have like a very long scene, like for example the very first scene that I showed you right here. I'll put it up on the screen again. I had the camera kind of pointed right over here in the scene, and so I added a depth of field so that kind of the leaves in the background and the leaves which are really close are a bit blurred, but then the leaves which are in the center are not blurred. So that just makes a really cool effect. You can kind of see how that looks. Some of the leaves are just a bit blurred. So if you want to do that, you could do that there with the depth of field, but I'm not going to have the depth of field on for this scene here. So just make sure you save your project again, and then you can press Ctrl F12 or click on render and render animation, and it's going to render out all the frames. And the animation has finished, so I'll just save the project again, and then I'll open up a new project by going File and clicking on New, and I'll just open up a new general. So in a new Blender file, I'm just going to click over here to go to the video editing workspace. If you don't have the video editing workspace, click on the plus here, and you can just go to video editing and choose video editing, or you can use another video editing program if you use something else for video editing. So then from my file browser, I'm just going to click and drag and drop in this cute fall pumpkin scene that I created. So this is the video that I created. If you want to check out that video, the link is in the description. And then to add in the rendered frames, I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to go to Image and Sequence. And here's all the rendered images, so just locate to the folder where you have the images and press the A key to make sure all the images are selected, and we'll click on Add Image Strip. And then also this, you can see right here, this is 60 frames per second because the video here is 60 frames per second, and I also rendered out the frames at 60 frames per second. So I'll just drag this up here and just stick it right over the top, and now if I play this, you can see we now have those leaves falling down in the scene. Now what's really cool about this is because it is a looping animation, we can use this as a cool video overlay. So if I press Shift D to duplicate and drop it here, and then play this, you can see now it's a perfectly seamless looping animation, so I could just continue to repeat this as many times as I wanted. So now if you want to render this to a video, what you can do is just go down here and you can choose an output, so I can just save this to my desktop, and then here on the file format, I can choose FFmpeg video, and then you can open up the encoding here, and I'll be using the container of MPEG-4, and on the video codec here, I'll use H.264, and I'll also use medium quality, and then I'll also use good. And then also, if you have any audio, I like to use AAC for the audio codec. So you can save the video editing file, and then you can click on render and render animation. And so there we have it. There is the finished animation of the fall leaves. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files and help support the channel, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And if you'd like to watch some more fall autumn themed tutorials, definitely check out my fall autumn themed tutorial playlist, where you can learn how to create some more fall artworks like a pumpkin and an apple pie, acorns, and some other fall themed tutorials. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.